The story of Silent Hill 2 is famous for its intricacy and its depth, and it's well known that many other famous works of art were influences on the game's narrative and design. These stories have been examined countless times over the years, but there is one I've yet to see analyzed deeply for its influence on this iconic game. Yet it is the first major hint we see as to the direction Silent Hill 2's narrative will take. Hidden in plain sight, on the walls of the bathroom in which James first comes to awareness, 2 quotes from one of the world's oldest stories, alongside a strange drawing and a poster of a character we've yet to meet. While I am decaying like a rotten thing, like a garment that is moth-eaten, thy hands fashioned and made me, and now thou dost turn about and destroy me. These quotes are from one of the most famous stories of the Hebrew Bible, the Book of Job. The story and the drawing on the wall both pull from Jewish tradition and folklore, and present the player with their first hints as to the story they're about to be told. This is a tale of suffering, of testing and temptation, of railing against the injustice of God. There was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job. That man was blameless and upright, one who feared God and shunned evil. Now the day came when the sons of God came to present themselves before Yahweh, and the adversary also came among them. Yahweh said to the prosecutor, "Have you given thought to my servant Job? Truly there is no one like him on earth, a blameless and upright man, one who fears God and shuns evil." The prosecutor answered Yahweh and said, "Does Job fear God for nothing? Stretch out your hand now and strike all he has, and he surely will curse you to your face." Yahweh said to the prosecutor, "Very well, all that he has is in your hand." A messenger came to Job and said, "The oxen were plowing and the asses were grazing nearby, when Sabaeans fell on them and carried them off." This one was still speaking when another came and said, "Your son and daughters were eating and drinking, when suddenly a mighty wind came from across the desert, and they died." Then Job arose, he tore his robe and shaved his head. He fell to the earth in worship and said, "Naked I came out of my mother's womb, and naked shall I return there. Yahweh has given, and Yahweh has taken. May Yahweh's name be blessed." In all this, Job did not sin or cast reproach on God. Yahweh said to the prosecutor, "Have you given thought to my servant Job? He is still holding fast to his integrity, but you have incited me against him to destroy him for nothing." The prosecutor answered Yahweh and said, "Skin for skin, all the man has he will give over for his life. Stretch out your hand now and strike his bone and flesh, and he will surely curse you to your face." "Very well then, he is in your hand, only spare his life." He struck Job with foul sores from the sole of his foot to the top of his head. His wife said to him, "Are you still holding fast to your integrity? Curse God and die." In all this, Job did not sin with his lips. 3 of Job's friends heard of all this evil that had come upon him, and each one came from his own place. They sat with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and no one spoke a word to him, for they saw the pain was very great. After this, Job opened his mouth and cursed his day. "Perish the day on which I was born, and the night that said a man is conceived. That day, let it be darkness. May God above not seek it, and may no light shine upon it. Why does he give light to the miserable and life to the bitter in spirit? Those who wait for death but in vain, and dig for it more than for treasure, who are rejoicingly glad and exult when they find the grave. Turn to me now, let there not be injustice. Turn to me, I am still in the right. If I summoned him and he answered me, I do not believe he would listen to my voice, for he would crush me for a trifle and multiply my wounds for no reason. Therefore I say, blameless and wicked alike, he finishes them. When suddenly a scourge brings death, he mocks the ordeal of the innocent. See now, I have prepared a lawsuit. I know that I am in the right. Who is it that will plead against me? For then I will be silent and die. Who is this who darkens counsel with arguments void of knowledge? Gird up your loins like a man, then I can ask you, and you will make me know. Where were you when I founded the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who set its measurements? Surely you know. Or who stretched the line over it? Have you commanded the morning since your days began, and let dawn know its place? Do you know the rules of heaven? Can you impose its order on earth? Look, I am small. What could I reply to you? I lay my hand on my mouth. I have spoken once, and I will not continue. Gird up your loins like a man, then I can ask you, and you will make me know. Would you even annul my justice? Would you prove me wrong so that you are in the right? Hear now, for I am the one who will speak. I will ask you, and you will make me know. By the hearing of the ear I have heard you, but now my eye has seen you. Therefore I quit. I am consoled over dust and dirt. After Yahweh had spoken these words to Job, Yahweh said, My anger has flared up against you and your two friends, because you have not spoken to me what is right, as my servant Job has. Yahweh reversed Job's fortunes when he had prayed on behalf of his friends, and Yahweh increased what Job had had before twofold. The Book of Job was likely written a few hundred years before the time of Christ, somewhere in the 500 to 300 BCE range. It is a narrative framed by two prose portions, which set the framework for a longer and intricately detailed series of 40 poems, the longest poetic section of the Bible. It is incredibly unique among biblical works, not only for the amount of poetry, but for how the style and language usage of the poem reflects very different ideas. Much of the Hebrew Bible is historical in some sense, recording events in ancient times, bloodlines, and mass migrations of people. This story is not. Much of the details reveal it is likely more of a fiction meant to teach, rather than seen as real history. Job is part of the wisdom literature, works which expound upon the concept of wisdom. These are works written by the wise to instruct others how to behave, either through simple explanations of good and bad behavior, or more complex philosophical writing. In Job, the author writes a story as set dressing to allow his characters to argue the concepts of justice and morality, and the idea of theodicy, the problem of explaining how evil can exist if God is just. Job is a powerful, well-off, and well-liked man, very successful and happy in his life. He is also moral and just, and God sees him as a prime example of one of his followers. The story opens with a presentation of Job's good situation, and an assertion from the narrator that Job is a good person. This is reinforced when the perspective switches to heaven itself, and we hear God saying the same thing. Another figure, however, disagrees. The accuser, presented as an angel who is essentially working as a prosecutor in this heavenly trial, claims that Job's faith only exists because he's been rewarded. If all the good things in his life were gone, he would have no love or faith in God. He asks permission to test the man, and God agrees. From a modern perspective, this seems ridiculous, as the test involves the murder of countless people and animals, all for the whim of a bet. But the story has to be understood on its own terms in the context it was originally written. The author is a devout Jewish man. The worldview he writes in believes God has a reason for all that is, so the reader is meant to understand this too is part of some plan. There is some explanation or rationale behind it. The crux of the story is the drama of knowing God is testing Job, watching Job suffer, and sympathizing with his suffering. After a series of 4 disasters that ends in the loss of all his wealth and belongings, and the deaths of all his children, Job is seen to be completely distraught. Yet he does not curse God as the accuser had claimed he would. God says this must prove Job is truly devout. The accuser again claims that the man would not be devout should he suffer, so God permits the accuser to afflict Job personally. The man falls ill, in terrible pain, just short of death. Still, he does not curse God. 3 of his friends hear of his suffering and come to see him, to lament with him. The suffering is so great they can say nothing, so Job and his friends sit in silence for 7 days and nights. This ends the opening portion of the story and leads into a much longer poetic section, in which Job's personality takes a turn. Much of the narrative varies in tone and style, leading some scholars to question the identity of the writer or writers. Whether or not it was edited over time or added to, the final text shows Job finally snapping at the end of 7 days, and beginning a long poetic diatribe about his suffering and the injustice of it. He wants to understand why all this has happened, and ultimately demands that God himself appear before Job to explain. The 3 friends with him are astonished by his behavior. They respond to his arguments with defenses of God's justice and mercy, which were typical of Jewish belief and other writers of the time. One common theme is retribution, the idea that the good are always rewarded by God and the wicked always punished. But the writer of Job does not believe this idea. In fact, the very narrative frame of his work debunks it. We know Job is a good, devout person, because God himself said it in the opening. We know then that good people do suffer unjustly. So this explanation for suffering cannot be the right one. Job responds in kind and continues lamenting his own suffering, expounding upon his just behavior. It can come across somewhat arrogant sounding, but it is the author further proving that this situation is unjust. Job was a good man in life, a very just man, liked and respected in his community, and now he has lost everything. Why has he lost it? Job does not understand, and though he explains that he is frightened and in awe of God, he still demands an explanation from him. A 4th speaker will expound upon a different idea of the nature of suffering, one that is likely the closest to the writer's true beliefs, since it is the final section before God himself intervenes. This last speaker explains suffering not as a sign of sinful behavior or godlessness, but as a method of discipline. It is a way in which God teaches right from wrong, that one can be made to suffer to keep them from greater, worse suffering down the line. That suffering can be a tool that helps one grow, and that God himself saves us from the worst of it, even when we don't see it. It is here that God himself appears, at Job's behest. He tears into the man, demanding he answer for his arrogance. The statements God makes are grand and incredible, meant to make Job and the reader feel their smallness and insignificance. The truth is, we cannot fully understand God's justice, his mercy, or the nature of suffering, because we cannot comprehend God. To comprehend something so vast and complex, which has existed since time and the earth themselves began, would be impossible for one as small and simple as man. God thus upbraids Job for his arrogance, his behavior through the last few sections, in which he demanded answers and cursed at God violently, yet he does not truly punish him for it. In fact, the following prose section shows God rewarding Job and condemning his friends, whom God says had the wrong point of view. In fact, God states that Job was right. His suffering was unjust. He refers to Job as his servant. Only 2 others in the Bible received that right, Moses and David. God then returns what Job lost to him, and even increases his wealth and rewards. It is a long and incredibly detailed poetic work, which in the original language is a complex pattern of poetic devices, lengths of syllables and lines, which create layers of meaning and context. It is ultimately an explanation of why we suffer, how evil exists in the world, in a manner that is daring for its time, allowing a character to curse God. Interpretations, of course, vary greatly. Christian tradition would take the character and present him as a symbol of persistence in the face of adversity, of determination in the face of suffering, a Christ-like figure before there was a Christ. Jewish tradition would ultimately go in the other direction, seeing Job as a blasphemer who got off easy. Ultimately, understanding the full original intent requires intense understanding of an ancient world and language, and perhaps even years of study would not be enough to uncover it all. But as a framework to better understand the story of Silent Hill 2, it is perhaps enough to understand this rough idea of the story of Job and his suffering. Both of the quotes on the bathroom wall come from the same character and the same portion of text. They are said by Job during the early poetic sections of the book, the point in which he has turned on God and begun to curse him, and to curse his terrible fate. "Thy hands fashioned and made me." The more modern translation of the full quote reads, "Your hands have shaped me and made me from all sides, but you have destroyed me." In this section of the text, Job is upbraiding God for having created him simply to see him suffer. Why should he spend so much time and energy in creation, if only to turn around and destroy what he has created? This continues in the next quoted section, which comes from a long description in which Job is comparing God's behavior to various enemies who may oppose him. "For you write bitter things against me and make me inherit the iniquities of my youth. You put my feet in the stocks and watch all my paths. You grave your mark on the soles of my feet, and this to one worn out like something rotten, like a garment eaten by a moth." The moth is referred to more than once in Job. In another section, it is used to describe how easily human bodies decay, comparing them to houses of clay, crushed more readily than a moth. Moths are symbols of decay in the Hebrew Bible. The association with destroying cloth and with dust occurs often. In Isaiah 59, the writer declares that those who condemn him will wear out like a garment. The moth will eat them. Psalm 39:11 reads, "You consume as a moth what is precious to him. Surely every man is a mere breath." Hosea 5:12, "Therefore I am like a moth to Ephraim, and like rottenness to the house of Judah." The word rotten appears in the Job text too. It comes from the Hebrew word rakab, which implies anything that is going to decay, is decaying, or soon will be decayed. That is truly anything that exists, for nothing in the world is permanent. The word implies an impermanence, a weakness at the heart of existence, and the translation rotten gives the image of something ready to give way, to break. During this section of the Job text, the man himself is covered in sores. His flesh is ruined. He is sick almost to dying. He is the crushed moth, the rotten garment, and in his pain and anger he lashes out at God, blaming him, demanding answers. What makes Job a particularly powerful narrative is its dual layering. We, the reader, have knowledge Job does not. In the opening of the story, he has no idea he is being tested, but we do. The prologue, with God and the accuser, told us as much, so we know why he is suffering and what the purpose is. To him, it is sudden and purposeless. He does not understand. It is only in the latter half of the narrative that he will come to the realization and to the truth that he is being tested, that he is suffering due to sins. And what sins were those? Truthfully, he had not sinned in the beginning. The opening presents him as a good man, as does our Silent Hill 2. In Job, it is revealed that Job is right to be questioning. God was testing him, punishing him when he had not sinned. What he is wrong in is his anger and cursing at God. Essentially, his idea was right, while his presentation was wrong. But in Silent Hill 2, we have a full reversal. Our protagonist does not know he has sinned, has no memory of the sin he has committed. The player is also in the dark the first time around, but the second time, the game takes on the same dual layering Job does, in which the audience has important knowledge the protagonist does not. Given how many extra endings and unlockables the game has, it seems clear it was intended to be this way, for the game to have two experiences, one of ignorance and one of knowledge. Another element of the Job story that has to be addressed is how heavily it relies on the language of justice and the courtroom. Terms used in the story are directly related to courtroom proceedings of the time. The angel who speaks to God against Job is called the prosecutor, and Job himself demands a trial, demands judgment for his sins. He has a lawsuit against God. The language of the courtroom makes this story even more than a test. It is a trial, though for who, God or Job, is not seen until the end of the story. James is also being tried, tested in court, and he is being judged. His judge and tormentor is Pyramid Head, who is referred to with similar terms. The painting of him is called Misty Day, Remains of the Judgment, implying that it is Pyramid Head who judged and condemned the other figures. The use of the prison level and execution block has similar implications. If this is a trial, then Pyramid Head is the judge and James is the criminal, and this echoes the story of Job, in which a man is tried by a being of otherworldly power beyond comprehension. There is another layer of meaning when we compare these quotes to another character of the narrative. For who is created only to be destroyed? Who is associated with moths? Maria, whose poster is on the wall of the bathroom, is the character who most resonates with these quotes. Is she the Job being tested? Is this a dual narrative in which both characters are on a journey to understand God? Maria exists solely due to the interference of the town, or whatever you might call the power, the magic, the intent that exists in this haunted place. She is a near copy of James' deceased wife. She has some memories of the other woman, but she is not that woman. The endings of the game reveal the real Mary, or some form of her, exists outside of Maria. Maria also is very different in dress and temperament, and may have been connected to a woman who worked at Heaven's Night in the town. So she may be two women, somehow blended together, an alchemy of souls created solely to test James Sunderland. The tattoo on Maria's belly is of a butterfly. As a final boss, her monstrous form summons deadly black bugs that flutter about James's head, eating away at him. And she too is a moth-eaten garment, falling ill with decaying skin, something that Mary also has in common with Job. And in the extra story centered on her, Maria seems to rail at God, to lament her fate, to be angry she was created solely to suffer, yet still ultimately accepting the life chosen for her. Inside the bathroom, there is a lot of writing and graffiti. Some of it is illegible or too small to be determined, but the strange image in the corner is large and easily discernible. The words written along the edges are Hebrew words for God, and the image itself is an actual historical talisman, which appears in multiple texts discussing the history of the occult and dark magics in Western tradition, where some members of the Silent Hill 2 team must have stumbled upon it. The image and the words are part of a much larger spell, a talisman meant to protect against the demon, Lilith. Lilith is a creature more of folklore than biblical tradition. She does not really appear in the Bible itself, and much of her story and lore are developed in non-canonical sources, in Kabbalistic, occult, and magical circles. The most common Jewish traditions surrounding Lilith relate to her role as a demon who kills children, that once upon a time she was Adam's first wife, who left him, and out of anger and jealousy she kills his human descendants. She acts as a folktale explanation for early infant deaths, and families would place these talismans at their infant's bedside to protect them from the demon in those early days. The talisman against a female demon associated with seduction. Across from it, a poster advertising a strip club, and the performer Maria, who happens to look just like our Maria, and with it the quotes from Job, all coming together to paint an image of a test, but for whom? Maria is our Lilith, tempting James away from Mary, from righteousness. At the same time, it is only with her assistance that James is able to wake up and remember his sin. It is only with her help, her sacrifice, that he is able to overcome. And that sacrifice, choosing and born from a wish to become the Maria who would tempt James, may itself be a Job-like trial for Maria, who must submit to being killed again and again and again. James, much like Job, is tested 4 times. Each test breaks a little of the mask he wears, returning some knowledge, some wisdom to him. First, Maria dies, killed by Pyramid Head in the hospital. James asks himself, "Mary, is this your way of taking?" Then she appears in the labyrinth, acting as temptress. When James enters the room later, she lays dead, skin decaying. Then James kills Eddie after the man confronts him about their violent natures. As Eddie lays dead, James is hit with a vivid recollection of seeing death before, but he shuts the memory out. The final test is in the hotel, where Maria dies for a 3rd time. Now finally James breaks. He admits to the truth. He admits he needed someone to test him. He acknowledges his sin. The full arc of Job. The trials, the refutations, the condemnations, the final climax and acknowledgement have been fulfilled. Depending on the player's actions, James and Maria may pass their test, or they may fail. If James had selfish motives for killing his wife, he may try to leave town with Maria, continuing his selfish behavior. Maria, too, in failing to have led James to the right path, has failed her test. She begins to cough. She will fall ill as Mary did, and James will lose someone again. The cycle continues. If, however, James had good intentions and has passed the test, he may be set free, either leaving town with Laura or ending his life, at least with the knowledge his wife loves him and forgives him. Maria does not appear, having completed her test, having accomplished her goal. She has simply vanished, perhaps returned to the dust that the moth is destined to become. Thanks for watching. Have a topic in Silent Hill you wish to see covered in a video? Let me know in the comments below. A new Silent Hill Symbolism will be coming once a week until Silent Hill 2 is released. So if you aren't excited about the remake, at least you have this to look forward to. Until next time.